When you open up a Word document, type the word feminism, and right-click in search of a synonym, only one word appears: radicalism. I find this ironic because, in my experience, the telling of the female story isn't radical enough. Once upon a time, the princess fairy tale begins. Once upon a time, when I was a kid, I spent my days wandering beneath blue Alabama skies and spent my nights dreaming of a princess life, one with long silk dresses and date nights to the symphony with my prince. One weekend, I forced my father to watch The Little Mermaid with me on repeat. I dreamed of becoming Ariel. Years later, when my dad remarried, I decided to instead dream of being Cinderella because it was obvious to me as a kid we then both had a stepmother. But my stepmom wasn't evil. And my stepbrothers didn't tease me too much. And no prince ever showed up to my school carrying one of my shoes. And yet, I still dreamed of a princess life. Once upon a time is how the princess fairy tale begins. Princess fairy tales stimulate much-needed imagination in kids, but the female story is always the same. The princess is beautiful on the outside. She has limited control of her fate, and she must fit into a traditional world. Just look at the Little Mermaid I forced on my father. She gives up her voice to transform into a human and exist in her prince's world. Young girls, including a younger me, use the fairy tale framework to think about life in childhood and beyond. So when a young girl sees a passive princess not capable of rescuing herself, she loses a bit of her inner warrior, and any struggle with her self-confidence becomes that much harder. That's why when the glass ceiling started to shatter, princess ideals for young girls began to shatter with it. Then came another false fable we feed our daughters: the Superwoman myth. As lovely as Aphrodite, as wise as Athena, with the speed of Mercury and the strength of Hercules. With this comic book introduction to Wonder Woman, the Superwoman myth begins. As lovely as Aphrodite, as wise as Athena. This is the phrase I strived to embody when I lived in New York City and attended the unabashedly feminist Barnard College. It was in classroom conversations and in wandering the streets of the concrete jungle that I overcame a deep fear of not being good enough. I learned I could dream bigger, speak louder, stand taller, and fight harder for what I want. And I also learned that as a superwoman, I shouldn't wait for any prince. I was the one I was waiting for. I could be the boss. I could own the dream apartment. And I could be the wife with equally split errands, housework, and bills. I learned that I could be anything I wanted. And I chose answer D, all of the above. Eventually, however, the knowledge that I could achieve anything turned into the burden of constantly needing to be perfect at everything. And every time I made a less than perfect choice, I felt sick or guilty or embarrassed. I felt that I was letting down every strong woman who lived before me. As lovely as Aphrodite, as wise as Athena, is how the Superwoman myth begins. The Superwoman myth promises girls of all ages they can have it all. It makes success look easy and casually glosses over failures and negative realities. It's the tale told with the benefit of hindsight, the perfect storyline. And the final story, the one we share in public, is setting expectations for young girls that are as unreal as the princess fairy tale dreams we exposed as unattainable years ago. I thank today's superwomen for showing that a princess is truly equal to a prince. All kids deserve to have these women as role models. But the way the female success story is told isn't helping anymore. The comic book introduction to Wonder Woman perfectly illustrates this problem. It states, she is known only as Wonder Woman, but who she is, or whence she came from, nobody knows. You see, we're comfortable sharing our true selves, our trials and tribulations, our flaws and limitations behind closed doors. But that's not good enough. We have to start sharing in the spotlight for all young girls to see. I know I find great power in listening to my female role models share personal stories. I aimed to harness this power for a younger and a wider audience and launched a media company. Her Little Story. Her Little Story publishes storybooks that introduce real female role models, not fictional characters, to young girls. Her Little Story shares real stories, not princess fairy tales, and not Superwoman myths. Her Little Story is feminism for young girls. And I know, I've said the word feminism a couple of times today, and it's a word that turns many people off. And trust me, I debated whether to get up here and talk about princess fairy tales or Superwoman myths at all. I really, really did debate. Even a few months ago, I didn't really feel a need or a place to add my voice to the conversation. But something happened in January. I attended the Women's March in Washington, D.C. I planted my feet alongside first-wave feminists who marched decades ago, and I cheered on girls so young, we don't yet have a name for their girl power beliefs. And as I was marching, I spotted this girl holding a simple sign, and it said, "I am the future." And then I realized, I can do better. We need to do better. Young girls are a population vulnerable to or empowered by the stories we share with them. And they are watching our every action and listening to our every word. My goal for Her Little Story is to empower by sharing the imperfect female story. It's why the first storybook is called So Perfect Deb. But standing here today, I can tell you that it's much easier to share someone else's story and much more difficult to share my own. But if that girl at the Women's March has taught me anything, it's that now it's not the time for easy. I have struggled. My little story begins. I have struggled because as a child, my existence was the product and the cause of much chaos. As a kid, I spent many afternoons sitting outside of school on this one brick ledge, my feet dangling down towards the ground, my backpack to my right, sitting waiting for hours for my ride home, forgotten. I was lucky because I knew a car would eventually roll up that hill, but I was nonetheless afraid. I was afraid I would never run away from that brick ledge. I was afraid I would never toss aside that backpack filled with books. And I was most deeply afraid that I would never escape this painful emotional desire for someone to show up and save me. I didn't study to learn. No, I worked hard in preparation to run away. And I did eventually run away to college in New York City. There I joined a sorority to make friends. I majored in math because I love numbers. And I participated in student government to give back to the school. These are the half-truths that I shared to make myself seem cooler and to make my life seem easier. What I'm comfortable telling you today is that I joined a sorority hoping I would finally feel pretty. I majored in math, hoping I would finally feel smart. And I ran for student government hoping that I would finally feel needed and finally be heard. It's tough to share the full truth without fear of being judged. Post-graduation, I ventured on a trip around the world by myself. I was fearless. It's another half-truth. I was searching. I was searching for meaning by running away from everything that seemed meaningless. And while my journey strengthened my independence, I still feared interdependence. So when I moved back to New York City, I fell in love with a prince. Better than a prince, a partner. And for a moment, I felt like a superwoman because I had it all on paper. The partner prince, a job I loved, supportive friends. I stopped searching because I had it all, and all at once. But then, like a tornado ripping through stability and permanence, one big life change overpowered my superpowers. I moved to Boston to attend Harvard Business School. There I was called non-traditional because I had worked in nonprofit. I have a nose ring. I wear ripped up Metallica t-shirts. I was the girl in the back of the classroom eating my hair and sniffing glue. And generally, I love being that girl. I'm really comfortable being that girl. But in this new environment, I started to doubt myself. And with self-doubt came self-sabotage. Academic failure at the business school is called hitting the screen. And given my personality, I didn't just hit the screen. I ran into it at full speed, kicking and screaming. I was very close to failing out. But with or without failure looming, I decided to instead drop out and work on my startup idea. It's another half-truth I shared with the world. The full truth is that I dropped out of school, moved back to New York City, began working on her little story, and relied on my prince to pay my share of the rent because I was afraid. I was afraid to let go of happily ever after expectations set in childhood and Superwoman standards set in adulthood. But the universe quickly jolted me back into reality. I was sick for half a year because of too much stress. I struggled to acquire new customers and grow the business. And my prince pushed me out our apartment door. You see, sometimes when you kiss a prince, he turns into a frog. And it was chaos yet again. But this time I knew I needed to empower myself. I knew I needed to face the business school dragon whose flames had so badly burned once before. I needed to return to graduate school and actually graduate. So here I am today, stronger, a bit wiser, more confident in my future, 1 month from graduation. And I'm saying goodbye to fairy tale frameworks and see you later to Superwoman stereotypes. I am letting go of all one-dimensional definitions of success. And I know I'm not alone in burning fantasy expectations to the ground. That's why I share this moment with you today, surrounded by the ashes of stale fairy tales and linear myths that I needed to burn. I share this moment with you today for this young girl, because I want her to hear my real story. I want her to see my ups and downs, learn from my twists and turns, and decide what, if anything, she wants to take from my words. And then I want her to go and find other real female stories from generations of women, your stories, and absorb them. The way you share your story will help your daughter, your granddaughter, your niece define her own future. So think about what it is you're most afraid to say out loud. Think about what you were so scared to say out loud and tell her. Young girls don't want to see us as the women we should be. They want to know us as we are. So let's embrace the radicalism. In fact, let's be even more radical in how we share the female story and how we tell our little stories for this young girl, because she, as she knows so well, is the future. Thank you.